Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's BAInsights. Today, I'm really pleased to introduce another couple of guests. This time, we'll be talking about the future of business analysis in a fully automated world. Nice and simple topic to get us going. But before we do that, Ben, perhaps I can ask you to introduce yourself, and I'll ask Paul to introduce himself after, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me along. So I'm Ben Baker. I'm a senior business analyst at the Environment Agency, a role that I've had for about 3 years now. And I'm currently involved in a transformation program looking at the digital systems used by the organisation for monitoring the environment and the water quality of the rivers and water bodies. Alongside that, one of the ways I throw back into the profession is a volunteer of the brown bag sessions, which IIBA run. These are weekly networking sessions for anyone interested in the BA profession or active in the BA profession. Love to see anybody along, and you can find out about those on the IIBA website.
Okay, excellent, Ben. Thank you very much. And I can definitely attest to those being a worthwhile hour spent. I think they're every week. Is that right, Ben?
Every week, yeah. They alternate between Thursday evenings and Friday lunchtimes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, and Paul.
Brilliant. Hi, guys. So my name is Paul Haywood. I'm a lead BA at Hiscox. Just moved here from Jet 2. And in my own time, I run a business called Next Gen Limited, where we're very much looking at how AI can support BAs and support some of the work that we do as BAs as well, which is quite exciting. It's quite new and slightly scary as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Paul. All right, perfect. Well, let's have a little simple chat about future business analysis in an automated world. So, let's start with a question in terms of: do you think a fully automated business environment is likely? And if so, what might the BA role be in such a place? And we'll start with you, Ben, first.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, in classic BA fashion, I sort of wanted to challenge the question with this one a little bit and think a couple of things stood out to me. The first was, what are we really meaning by fully automated? I think processes will undoubtedly be close to or completely fully automated, but the business environment, what do we mean by that? Are we talking sort of the entirety of a company? Are we talking about the entirety of the different companies that interrelate with each other? I think sort of defining that term is quite one I'd be interested to unpack a little bit. I think as well, it got me onto thinking about not just will that happen, but do we want that to happen? Because I think sometimes we look at sort of the technology coming in and almost as if it's kind of going to happen to us, as if humans don't have a choice in that. And actually, I think we have a role in deciding, yes, we could do this as a species. Do we want to? In what ways is this or isn't this beneficial for us? And one of my favorite films that I've watched is Wall-E, for the way it looks into the future, and you see the destiny of mankind there is to essentially live in a fully automated spaceship that's had to leave the planet, and people have become entirely dependent on systems to the point of inaction. And I think obviously there's some tongue in cheek there, but the why question, I think, to me is interesting. Not just will it happen, but do we want it to? Yeah,
I would agree, and you're right to sort of use the BA skills to start interrogating the question as well, because I think I've kept it really broad, I guess, and somewhat provoking. But I think for probably most of us, I think even within the organisation in which we work, we're probably a long way off of automation, let alone that being part of a fully automated industry, I would say. But even thinking about the question, it did get me thinking about some organisations and industries that are probably a little bit better at automation than others. So I work in financial services. We're certainly, companies I work with are looking at automation to a level, but there will definitely be interactions that you need to have with customers that you won't want to automate for many reasons. But in the flip side, I was thinking of like some of the car manufacturers, and they've done excellent work, of course, over so many years in sort of automating the production line and probably huge parts of it. But even then, wouldn't have automated every aspect of their organisation. That's interesting to hear your thoughts, Paul.
I think it's funny because I completely agree. But I do have part of myself which would always challenge. I'm very much a futurist. When people say the future, I ask how far away are you looking? Because tomorrow is a day away. In a year's time is, it sounds like a long way away, but actually it's not that far. But the rate that technology will progress between now and then, well, we've seen it with just the language models these days. They've progressed so much over this last year. So I think there's 2 points to this question. Will companies be able to adapt to a fully automated world in the future? And if we say that future's in 10 years' time, can companies do that? And I don't think they will. I think we're seeing it today. There's a lot of large companies trying to keep up with just modern technology, and they're struggling because of the size or through complications within the processes. But then we're also seeing a lot of startups which are really being able to thrive in that space because they've been opened up to a world where they don't need the people. The processes are already automated for them. They can buy systems or solutions off the shelf that do everything for them that they need to, and it's just a plug and play. And so I think we're going to see a divide in that space where old companies and large companies are going to struggle and are going to be very labor heavy. But there's going to be a lot of new coming up in place which are going to try and really capitalize on what is going to be available for them. And I think we will see fully automated businesses to an extent where, of course, interactions with other people and stuff like that still will have to be manual to an extent. But I think it's interesting to challenge: can it be automated? Can it be fully automated? And what are the restrictions there? And like many people in the world, I look at that as a challenge and go, well, can I automate that? And how can I do that?
Yeah, and there's an interesting point, and it connects back to obviously same question, but similar to Ben's response in that, when we think about the overall process, where the internal teams, where the external clients and stakeholders are involved in that, some of it probably feels like it is something you should automate. Those laborious, repeatable, not particularly valuable type activities. Whereas those where you really need to think about things, you might need to add an element of creativity. You want to try and provide bespoke services if that's the what part of the services or products that are being offered. They're certainly things you probably wouldn't want to automate if they're changing quite regularly, or if your clients are paying a premium because they're expecting a personal service. They won't be too happy if you're automating that service. So I imagine sort of even taking the scenarios you mentioned, Paul, that you've got the startups, if they're able to do it and it's right for their business model, they might do it. Whereas I guess those bigger firms where there's a lot of legacy in the way they're structured and their technology, whether they decide that full automation is better for them, they might also at least decide that in the short term, they want to make themselves distinct based on their manual parts of the services they're providing, or even perhaps the social responsibility that they're taking by retaining human activity, as it were.
Absolutely. And I think you said two things there, which is very interesting. One was creativity, and the other was people paying a premium for that human interaction. I mean, from a creativity perspective, humans will always win. For now, at least, until for the foreseeable, will always win. But I think there's a line between creation and recreation, because one's making something new, the other is taking an input, whether it's a memory, something you can see, something you can feel and sense, and turning it into something else, which is another way of translation. Yeah. And I think that's the scary point there is AI is fantastic at translation. We've seen it in a lot of the current models. It can take music, art, poetry, stories, not always the best, but it's growing, it's getting there. That's all translation or recreation of something that's already known. So I think when we look at that new world, that creativity and that creation, creating from new, I think that's where we're going to see that human kind of side of it really start to grow. And I think that's where companies will still rely heavily on that human aspect. And looking at the BA position, when we're looking at trying to create something from new, whether it's looking at business strategy, looking at new directions or problem solving, we'll thrive there a lot. And then the other side of it as well was the other thing you mentioned was the human interaction part of it and people paying a premium. And I'm going to challenge that a little bit because I don't think people pay a premium for human interaction. I think people pay a premium to be understood correctly. And if that's through an AI assisted tool or whether that's through a person, I don't think the end customer, and this is a controversial opinion, I don't think the end customer is overly worried about who that is or what that is. I think they're worried more about being understood correctly. And that's something I think we just got to be mindful of a little bit, maybe. I might be wrong.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably a fair point. Yeah, and unless there's some really thorough research into it, I guess we won't know for sure. But I think it's a fair point that people will not necessarily be satisfied with a long delay, but a personal touch. Maybe they like a personal touch if they can get the same level of service or the same speed of service. But who knows? Making an assumption. I guess other things as well that naturally I think about when I think about automation as well is that maybe the act of automation is I think it's always an opportunity for BAs to get involved in some interesting work, to think about how the current processes or the current activities can be automated. But also as well, I think there's a lot of work to think about how you would monitor and how you would oversee or govern those processes, which might lead to, interesting dashboard creation. So you can actually almost do the sort of the control environment to sit above it all and see what's going on. So I think there's sort of probably some opportunities for BAs to maybe raise themselves above some of the real detail that some might find themselves in. If their activities are being automated, they can look at more monitoring type responsibilities, perhaps. So that certainly feels like it's interesting. But I'm with you. I don't think it's necessarily going to happen overnight. So I feel like BAs might be safe at least for a year or so, a little bit more, hopefully. So I guess, do you think it'd be interesting to get your view, and we'll start with you, Paul, really, on what opportunities you see there being, or further opportunities you think there being for BAs, and not just through automation, but sort of auto assistance as well.
So I'm going to categorize into the two, because I think it's larger companies who are potentially moving into that world and new startups. So I think for the larger companies, there's always going to be how can we automate? How can we move into that new tech? And a lot of what most of us are probably on projects now, big transformation-based projects, trying to pull into that space, bring something up, whether it's moving to cloud, whether it's bringing automation into processes, identifying how we can utilize data science and all this good stuff. So I think we're already kind of in that space a little bit, and I think that's just going to grow as more tools and more more products become available. We'll be supporting and be the change advocates moving into that space and moving companies into that space. And I think for the new startups, our role will then slightly change a little bit to bring in that new technology in and it plugging into the current automation. So instead of trying to move from old stack to new, they'll be trying to keep new stack relevant or work with the efficiencies that the business has got to pull in new products or pull in new markets. But I think what's common in both of those is how we interact with our stakeholders and how we interact with the business is fundamentally going to change. And it's going to open up an opportunity for us to be more strategic thinking, more problem solving. I'm not going to say firefighting, although sometimes I feel like I am one some days. But interacting maybe more with AI or AI assisted outputs instead of directly with the stakeholders. And translating that again maybe into a input for another AI assisted tool, or you working with a lot of automated tools to make our role real streamlined, real efficient, but allowing us to look at those kind of more creative natured work, problem solving, strategic thinking, new products, identify new markets, that kind of thing, and looking at benchmarking companies, all this good stuff which we want to try and break into around, instead of just being requirements analysis, data analysis, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting when you talk about things like benchmarking. You think actually, we've got access to the right data at least. Then automation can provide lots of assistance. I think in benchmarking activities. So I think that would be one to keep an eye out on. I definitely agree. I think as well, it's interesting when you say like the firefighting, and I think it maybe in itself, might be an interesting dimension of, the types of root cause analysis and issue analysis, investigations that we do as well. In that, there's still going to be issues to look at. They might just be auto-generated issues, but they're still going to need some interrogation. And who knows? We might be able to use the technology to help us find the root causes. I kind of suspect we might be able to, or I hope so. But Ben, it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on that same question.
Yeah, no, agree. I think a few things on that. I think one is, you touched on it earlier, I think briefly, when you sort of talk about who automation is right for and how might it affect different customers. And I think that's possibly a role where BAs can step up more, is into thinking about the wider implications of things that are coming in, which I suppose goes hand in hand with the strategy that Paul's mentioned. Is thinking about what are the ethical considerations of bringing this in. How is it going to affect different people? Will it change, give people a different experience depending on their background? And if so, is that right? And do we need different mitigations in place? What are those considerations? And I think that's that ethical dimension. That's going to be something that's very hard to ever automate, actually, because I think ethics goes hand in hand with empathy, which is intrinsically human. So I think there will be a role for BAs to step into that. Similarly, to looking at the sustainability angle of it, and considering our consumption on the planet and the impact of bringing in automation. I think as automation, AI, it can give us tools to tackle those things. It can also add to the problem. And I think that becoming part of our decision making basis, I think, will be ever more important. And I think the climate crisis is only going to come closer. And I think these ethical and sustainability questions are only going to become more important. So I think possibly where traditionally you've been making business cases and the consideration has been largely down to what's the financial bottom line, I think we will start to see, we'll never move away from a financial bottom line, but I think the importance of other considerations in making a case will become ever more important. So that's an opportunity for business analysts, I think, to broaden out their ability to consider those different elements. Yeah. I also think one other thing that strikes me is we've talked about sort of the data that will be available for things like benefits, benchmarking, big data. That was the sort of the emerging trend 10 years ago. We're well used to big data sets now, but I think we live in a situation where we can have a lot of noise, a lot of data available, but not necessarily a lot of listening and a lot of understanding from that data. And again, I think that's, yes, machines can analyze and can give us those insights, but I think to understand and to listen and to relate that to other people, I think is inherently a human trait as well, and something that BAs will be excellently placed to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I mean, it's interesting when you were talking as well about the ethical side of Ben, because it naturally got me thinking as well, for some reason, when we think about like technical debt sometimes when we're making changes, is there going to be some sort of element of AI debt that we start to incur, that actually, for introducing AI and actually getting some benefits on one side, that actually we're incurring some disadvantages that we need to then fix, in some other ways. Not smart enough yet to think about what they might be, but certainly it's worth thinking about anyway in the longer term, I'm pleased to say. And actually, it's probably quite a similar question, with a slightly different perspective in terms of, if we think about there's opportunities for the BAs, and as we just discussed, how do you envisage the BA role changing in a more automated landscape? And I'll ask that question to you, Ben, first of all.
Yeah, so I think as well as the businesses we're working for becoming automated, I think the profession itself will have an increase in automation. So there's already tools coming out that can very effectively process map. There's tools coming out that can capture user stories or capture requirements and put them into a user story format. So I think we will start to see our profession automated more. And I think that will have a couple of knock-on effects. I think we will see, to some degree, a democratization of business analysis outside of just the professional business analysts doing it. So I think these tools will allow non-trained business analysts to do business analysis themselves using these tools. So I think we'll see that democratization. And I think then that will naturally lead the professional business analysts to more of a specialized role where, as Paul said, we'll be picking up some of the more complex tasks, the stuff that's a step beyond. That could be interesting. I think that if that works well for you and you're able to move into those positions, I think that's quite an exciting place to be. I think it will be interesting to see what that does in terms of competition within the market. whether that's a smaller amount of specialized jobs for the same pool of people. So that will be an interesting change. And what was the other point I was going to say on that? I think as well, it's almost a warning, not a warning sign, but a consideration for us to think about how we practice now as well, to think of actually those traits we heard earlier about creativity and thinking outside the box and thinking strategically, and not just sort of applying a template and applying. Are we acting like that already? Because actually, if we, even in our practice now, pre-automation, if we're taking a BA approach where we're largely just taking an out of the box tool and just applying it sort of rote without thinking about the bespoke considerations, we're almost sort of automating ourselves in our practice even before the machine comes in an automated fashion. So I think we can sort of begin to learn to practice in that way we'll need to in an automated world, even now, actually.
Yeah, really interesting, actually. Paul, what you want?
I think it's interesting. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that it is going to change. Don't get me wrong, there are going to be companies who won't be able to use or won't want to use, whether it's for ethical reasons or belief reasons. They won't want to use AI in these processes. So there are still going to be a position, I believe, for what we see today as business analysis and our role today. But as you mentioned then a few times, I think AI is going to replace a lot of the kind of the grunt work that we do and open up to that more creative space. I know there's definitely tools there that can capture from a zero knowledge basis requirements through to in some pretty decent outputs, and then convert them into user stories and user cases. And I think it's quite scary, but also as well it's exciting because it does open up to that flexibility to give you time to do other things. If we look at how long we spend doing some of that grunt work, how long can we actually then spend on doing some of that more interesting stuff where we're looking at things like strategy. I mentioned benchmarking, but there's a lot more in there in terms of when we're looking at more root cause analysis, blue sky thinking, and looking at encouraging the business to think differently, or that out of the box thinking, which we absolutely excel at. My view of where business analysis grew from is because we were able to apply that kind of thinking right at the start of a project or start of the change, and ask the questions, extract that information in a new unique way. Otherwise, businesses would have just captured it anyway. And applying that same kind of thinking further down the line, or from a more hierarchical view or from a more enterprise view, is just going to allow us to be a lot more creative, but support businesses in a lot more creative ways, and to think about things differently. So I think absolutely right. It's the tools are going to replace that day-to-day job, and that day-to-day job's going to turn into something a bit more. Unfortunately, I do think that is going to make the role a lot more specialized. How that impacts the market, I'm not going to speculate. But I think there'll still be a place for what we see as business analysis today. But I do think the role will adapt and change to a more specialized role in the future, looking at more future style thinking, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think perhaps for those BAs that see it very much as like they see their job as the administrative side, it's the drawing of the process, or it's writing requirements or stories, rather than putting the value in the work that got them to the point that they could define the process or they could articulate the requirements. Maybe they're in for somewhat of a surprise and think that their job might be taken away. But those that are able to recognise the value they've had in helping stakeholders and help the business think about what they need or what their problems are, or why they've got certain priorities, and even how to explore those, I think we'll probably find it quite an interesting time as they find new avenues are opening up to help them maybe get ahead of the curve than just relying on asking people. That might be new ways to uncover data.
I think it's going to be a lot of us working with the world of automation, with the world of change, and with the world of AI to grow our role with it. And Ben mentioned something at the start around it happening to us. I think if you close your eyes and shoot yourself behind the door, it's going to absolutely happen. This is the future that we're moving into, and we're seeing that a lot with technology. But it's an exciting world to step into, and how can I think there's not going to be one role as well. if we all open up our eyes and walk forwards with it, we're going to naturally adapt our own roles. So I don't mean open up our eyes like we're all blind to it, but we're all going to naturally adapt our roles to the tools that have been given to us, to the automations and to the new ways of working. I think it might even be that there's actually varying roles of what a BA is in the future, depending on how that's broken out. With seeing things like that with with projects already, with current roles that we will work with in the day-to-day as well.
That's it. Yeah, and it may even let some of us, let some of us, makes it sound like I want to try and do this stuff, but to do multiple roles at any given point. So maybe they want to be a BA product owner, as I think I was discussing last week, or combine being a BA and getting more into the architectural development side or the testing side. Maybe taking some of the admin burden away helps that, and also helping assist the BA in bring those things together in a more automated way might also help them as well.
I think there's also a place for making the case for. I think that we've heard a lot about kind of the opportunities that come with this, and being able to step into that more creative space, and it will free us from the mundane to be able to add value in other ways. I think we need to be careful to not assume that will happen naturally. I think there's a place for, as BAs, we have to make the case for why that would continue to add value, and also something on businesses to recognise that in itself is still valuable. And in prepping for this session, I did a bit of reading. Looking back towards the Luddites, that now is we mainly know the Luddites as this buzzword for people anti-technology. And one thing that struck me that was really interesting about the Luddites was they weren't actually anti-machines, anti-change per se. What they were anti was the distribution of the wealth that these new machines were creating, where the profits were going to, and the effect that was having on wages, and also the effect it had on production, and it was leading to shoddy production. So they weren't protesting machines and change, they were willing to embrace that. They were protesting the share of the profits and the impact on production. And I think we can learn from that in this. So will machines coming in be an opportunity to release those, I'd say, better, more valuable skills for BA and embrace those, or will it be an opportunity to sort of cut corners, reduce costs, and kind of get the minimum analysis done to get you to the next step? So I think that'd be an interesting one to navigate within the profession. Just think that ties into Paul's point about not shutting ourselves behind doors, but being part of the change. I think part of that change is intentionally redefining our role within it.
Yeah, brilliant. And it feels like as well, I mean, thinking very much about the specific skill set, the competencies that you have that can support that are more relevant in the future, or rather less relevant in the past, as it were. And I imagine if BAs start to think about their skills and their competencies, and which of them are more in tune with the way that the organisations are going, the business are going, gives them an opportunity to develop those skills and those competencies further. Which is a perfect segue. So thank you, Ben, to take us into that next question in terms of, are there any particular competencies or BA skill sets that you think will be most helpful to the BAs in an automated, or as we navigate ourselves towards an automated world? Anyway, I'll go back to you, Ben, on that, as you so nicely teed up the question.
Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. You can give me the fiver later. I think mindset, I think, will be the key competency for BA going forwards. I think you talk to a lot of BAs, and there's something you can see in them about the way they look at the world, that desire to question whatever it is, the desire to question, why do you do it like that, or why is this the case, or what about such and such. There's that sort of natural inquisitiveness that they sort of can't suppress it. It will come out. Sometimes it wind people up who have to deal with them, but it's what makes them particularly good at their job. And I think that mindset will be the thing that needs to remain at the fore of sort of, it again goes back to creativity. Creativity comes out of, I think, questioning and thinking differently, thinking about something new. And that mindset will be the single driver. I think technical skills actually will be less so, in the same way that word processing sort of has reduced the need for spelling and grammar to be as good. I think we will find the same with technical. I think that's where the automation, where the technology will assist in gaps in technical skill. And actually technical skill is always changing, and you can always learn that. But mindset is a driver that's much harder to learn. So I think for me, that will be the thing going forward. Connected with this, one thing I just wanted to check in as well that occurs to me, and this was something I think someone else shared with me, it came up in one of the brown bag sessions actually, which I thought was a really profound thought, is what will entry into the profession look like? Because I think we're talking about the mundane being replaced, and we'll get to do the sort of the more complex, the more exciting. And I think that's great if you're an established BA who's kind of got through the mundane and you're able to step into that complex. But it's also that mundane is also some of the ways that we kind of learn the profession. And if you're new coming in and you've got a machine doing that entry level stuff, that then becomes quite a hurdle to jump to. So I think in our training, in our mentoring, in the way we think about the next generation coming into the profession, we're going to have to think about what that looks like if some of that sort of entry level stuff has been outsourced to the robots.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's it's an interesting opportunity for organisations like the IIBA who might switch from maybe some of the more very technical aspects of what they probably train to helping with that broader mindset and just doing as much as they can to help BAs explore their environment and explore the possibilities, which again might be quite interesting because maybe there's no set rules on what the outcomes can be, or how you can get there. So therefore, the different techniques or approaches that can be used and will be used successfully can grow.
Yeah.
Which is quite an interesting thought. Paul, what would be your view?
No, I think I completely agree, and I think this is where I might annoy some people with this one. I think this is where apprenticeships are probably going to be a bit more of a strong point over conventional learning. As that part of that day job is replaced and we start looking at technical, or that more complicated or more exciting world, it becomes more of a skill that's trained than a skill that's learned. And you get that through experience. I mean, like I said, you said it absolutely right. We've got a lot of exposure to that world through doing some of that mundane, some of that day grunt, to get us to where we are now. And I think with things like apprenticeships, that'll start becoming the front door to kind of that future role, that future world. Absolutely looking at and supporting and looking at the roots of where we've come from, and where AI tools may have replaced some of like that upfront kind of work that we've done. I think we are going to change that more creative space, and that's something that we can hone. You're absolutely right. It's a skill that's within us. We've probably all heard no end of times through teachers or through previous instructors or mentors, whoever it may be, of why do you keep asking questions? Stop asking questions. That's just how it is. And it's like, no, there's got to be a reason. So I think it's a natural inquisitiveness and natural curiosity and out of the box thinking and creative thinking to look at a scenario, a situation, or a change from a different perspective. And we'll see people coming into our space and looking to support them through honing their skills instead of teaching them conventionally, I think. And I think that's how we're probably going to see that change and shift. Again, we're probably looking quite a bit down the line, but as these tools start replacing some of that front door, which would have allowed us the time and the pace and the exposure to think these things, we'll have to create an environment where people can perfect them and hone them and practice them with the support. And that's where I see apprenticeships winning the fight there, I think, a little bit. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It does allow us, and we've mentioned it a few times, that creative side of it, it does allow us to step into that world of creativity or blue sky thinking, challenging thinking, and guiding and supporting a business from a more kind of not elevated position, but in a higher up position. We're not looking so much at the requirements of individual projects, but the overall goal of that project, or that change and that strategy and that direction, that market, how that technology is changing. But also as well, we'll always have to look at how we can bring a new AI into the AI that we've already got. And BAs will still have to do that. So hopefully. But yeah, so I think it's going to be interesting and fun.
I think interesting, and which seems a bit converse to some degree, or opposite to some degree as well, in that you think about the people interaction that we need to have, and we continue to have, and we always have had as BAs as well. I think that for me is definitely going to be a skill set that continues to be so important as well. We still need to find out what drives people, what is happening in their situation, not just take the surface level observations, but to get right deep into the situations and the variations of them as well. So I think, those people skills, that empathy, and just taking the interest in people as well are going to be things that probably will come more to the fore, and people will start to appreciate more, maybe, or appreciate more, start appreciating as well. And I think, so it feels like they're probably things that that people can start to develop more of. And it never hurts to be better in that sense. So I think I agree with you, Paul, in terms of the quicker you can get in front of different people, get used to working with them, is going to put a BA in good stead, rather than learning, just relying on the theory side of things as well. So but it's definitely interesting. It'll be in those. Makes me think as well, man. Some of the we've mentioned a few times, like the more mundane, the routine tasks. Obviously you touched on a moment ago. Whether we're missing the opportunity to perhaps develop as we might bypass some of those activities. But can you recognise any specific examples of those mundane or administrative tasks that you think would be a good opportunity for BAs to lose at some point in the future because of automation? And I'll let you go first on that one, Paul. It doesn't have to be necessarily a point to current or past employers as to what you'd like them to change about your working day.
I'm going to take a slight change to this. I'm not going to look at it from what do I think my employees or I've experienced in the day that I want to remove, but what has AI removed or what has AI been made possible through little guidance? And I'm going to put that caveat in there, little guidance. And I'm not, so I've been playing very much heavy in the machine learning language space and looking at tools and looking at building and what we can replace in our day-to-day job. Right, because I'm inquisitive. I just want to see how far can I push it and take it. And what I found is that upfront initial scope investigation, requirements questioning, and I'm not just talking one layer of questioning or 2 layers of questioning. I'm talking about real deep questioning. Like I've took this thing right down to the depths of what I really, really wanted through playing around and testing, and the tools I've been building. And it's the information that's came out of that has been terrifying and exciting at the same time. It was very much a mixed bag of emotions. So I was like, that's me. That's what I do on a day-to-day. But also as well, wow, how's it done that? And I say with very little guidance because I wasn't using ChatGPT or any of the conventional chatbots, but the actual AI that sits behind the APIs and building a tool through a complex little web of functions to make it possible. And what I found is that it does replace that kind of grunt work. And when I say grunt work, this is requirement solicitation, questioning, in-depth questioning, topical questioning, out of scope questioning. We can look at things like processes and good stuff like that, all the way to the point where you can output into a summary, user stories, scenarios, functional, non-functionals. That kind of anything you would expect to find in a scoping document, in a BRS, that kind of piece of world. I've been able to recreate, not through any of my inputs as a BA, but my inputs as a stakeholder. And I think if we also look at what AI can replace in terms of some of that grunt work, all of the above. Now, when I then review that as a stakeholder and then review that as a BA, brain then start challenging it and go, oh, can we then look at X, Y, and Z? How does this align with the strategy? Is there a better way of doing this? So naturally, my thinking started turning around to that more strategic side of thinking. But what I was finding is a lot of that translation of what somebody wanted into something else was able to be replaced quite easily. Not easily in terms of anyone could just pick up a pen and write away, but easy in a way that it didn't show any effort or strain when asking these questions or diving through it. And I say with little guidance because there were still hiccups and teething issues. But as we see these models growing and becoming more, I say, intelligent, they are going to have less teething issues. And as these tools grow and as these tools develop, that little guidance is going to become not guidance at all. It's just going to become natural. So I think that's when we say about grunt work, and I think that's what I've experienced has already been replaceable. And has already been deliverable through tools that I've built and I wonder what else other people have been doing in the world. But I mean, just from my own experiences, and I think it's like I say, it's exciting, it's scary, but it did allow me then naturally to start thinking about that next step. I didn't have to think about turning a set of requirements into user stories for a delivery team, but understanding that impact those requirements and start thinking of what that next world needs to look like, what other problems are the business going to face, and these kind of questions, this kind of elevated thinking around the change instead of what does the change need to do.
Yeah.
So that's what I've started already experiencing, and I've already seen, and like I say, I've done this in my own time, so it's not used in my employers, but as these tools become ready available and employees start picking them up, I think people will naturally start thinking these elevated worlds and then in this new kind of way of thinking.
Yeah, it does make me think as well, Paul, that around like things we traditionally thought about, but things like quality of the outputs and the depth and the thought that's gone into the inputs sometimes. So I think anyone that's ever issued a survey will be able to attest the quality of inputs that you sometimes get as an example. And I think if the stakeholders are I guess honestly and comprehensively interacting with the AI, then I think there's probably a good argument that you'll get some good output from it. If they're sort of not really putting in everything they should be into the surveys or into keying the data in, then will the AI have enough about it to be able to manage that or to go recognise it and to encourage the stakeholders to go a little bit further and add what they know?
I think
it's interesting. It'll be interesting.
I think it's interesting you say that because we see stakeholders as being the custodians of that knowledge, whereas these learning models are taught on a mass variety of knowledge, and without going too depth into it, but again, seeing and testing that from a basic point of view or even a really engaged stakeholder perspective, it's interesting how much is already understood and known. And this is where it comes to what is new thinking and what is just recreation of something else. How much AI actually already understood and already knew through very little stakeholder engagement. And similarly as well, how much questioning it could support with and say, actually, it knows all this information. Let's dig out that. So I don't think stakeholder engagement will challenge it too much, but more will mean that we may tease out some of the more generic based kind of changes versus what are the kind of more blue sky, new world, new technology kind of thinking changes. I think that gap will start becoming quite prevalent when we start using the AI assisted tools.
And there's some interesting points around there as well, around just thinking about the fact that at the moment we engage with a lot of stakeholders to get different perspectives, because often there isn't the data there to enable us to extract it or to verify what one person says. And as you rightly point out, if there's a lot more data and AI capabilities to do that, maybe we won't need to be as reliant on asking stakeholders, because we are able to say, Paul, I can see that you've done the same thing in the same way 10 times. I can see what it is. Then I wouldn't really need to ask you, and then I certainly wouldn't need to draw it, and I certainly wouldn't need to put it back in front of you to ask whether that is actually what you do. As an example. So it's really an interesting perspective. Ben, what will be your view?
Yeah, well, to us, I thought Paul's answer was excellent, so I'm not going to try and add anything to it. But other than what I was going to add was a couple of questions back, I suppose. I'm quite intrigued by this work you've done in the background, Paul. So a few things that were sparking off to me as you were speaking and as John was throwing in some of those extra questions is around some of the, I suppose, again, it's those human skills. So some of my business analysis at times has particular transformation has sort of strayed into that change management territory where the sort of the emotional side of things becomes quite real. So I suppose I was interested with the AI and with the tools you're creating, how you think or how they have coped with maybe the stakeholders themselves giving contradictory answers, even the same stakeholder contradicting themselves, or picking up on what's not said, or kind of what the change might mean for them emotionally in the background. Because taking John's point, that you might be able to sort of, the machine might be able to analyze what they do already, work out what would be a better way, and kind of make that plan all without speaking to them. But then if it still relies on them to implement that change, sometimes the act of asking, even if it's unnecessary from a kind of getting the answer point of view, is very necessary in terms of the connecting with the person and getting them on board with the change. So I suppose, I don't know, just interested in a few more reflections from you, really. It's stealing John's job, but you know, a few more.
Carry on.
I think emotions is not only a pain point in some of our day-to-day job anyway, but it's absolutely going to be a hard point for AI to navigate around. What the way I see I was getting around this is taking stakeholder-led change, which means potentially more engagement with stakeholders themselves, and then being on board onto that change a lot more. With the absence of people like BAs, I sometimes feel like I end up having to bring them along, but I also encourage them into what they want and get them to think about it. And what I've been able to recreate is not all of that. Absolutely, like I say, AI is not replacing the job yet, but I have been able to start building that questioning, that encouragement side, and starting to build that excitement for change in the stakeholder.
Yeah,
it still doesn't remove the emotional aspect that some of our job and some of the change that we deliver is impacting people's lives, or repurpose FTE or whatever it may be. In that emotion side of it, unfortunately, is not going to be picked up in AI yet. But at the same time as well, just flipping it, does that also create a more efficient form of capture, because we're removing that emotion that we may potentially hold, and that challenge that we hold when we're looking at change, and when we're trying to elicit that information from the stakeholders and look at actually what they want. Are we subsequently as well encouraging a different change because we have an emotional attachment to people's jobs or people's roles? So I think it's a very interesting question, because you start bringing emotion into what is ultimately a system. It's a computer that doesn't have emotions. They don't have feelings. They can simulate those, absolutely, and I think they're very good at showing empathy, but they don't feel empathy. So I think we can get clever in how we ask questions, how we can encourage and excite change with our stakeholders, which is half the battle when we're looking at emotions. But I think that detachment from emotions further down the line can encourage a cleaner, potentially, and I might be completely wrong with this, but can encourage a cleaner change, because we're detaching that element of cloud when we're saying, do we actually want to do this? Is this actually what we want to do? And the output is, yes, this is what needs to happen. This is what we need to do. And this is the scope. We can deal with the emotion now knowing and understanding that this is the direction we're going to take. And that's again where we come back into the show and looking at, okay, what does this mean for the business, and how does this mean for us moving forwards? So I think it's a very interesting question. And I say all this, it has guidance, and it's the tools I've been building so far are not near finished. They're scary. They are terrifyingly scary. It's how efficient and how well they do this, and how well they do pick up on hints, on inklings. I did a little test, and I dropped in something very hypothetical, but then with a little hint of a new requirement, and it picked up on that, sniffed it out, and explored it very easily. And I was excited, because it means that I could then come away from that and do, like I say, more analysis on that change, instead of spending my time questioning that stakeholder. And the other thing I've noticed with these tools is so far, you can build it is this very much stakeholder led, or very much pushing the stakeholder to answer? And they don't have to refer back to you and take your time up to give you the answer. They can do it on their own time, when they are available and when they're free, and depending on what mind. And the information they feed into it, they don't have to read back to make sure it's a new requirement. It's all relevant and it's all consistent. And I think that's where it's really exciting. But the emotion side of things is a hard place to navigate around, because you've got two sides of that: the emotion of the impact of the change, and the emotion of actually encouraging change. one
Makes me think, Paul, that as you go through those acts of sort of like automating some of the activities that are typically quite intensive on the stakeholders that you work with, that actually frees up more time and I guess more emotional space for them to actually explore the things they could really do with or really add value, or to, you know, even to see an automatically generated view of their process or the different paths they took for a process would enable you then to talk about, well, why did you take this path on this occasion? Why did that seem logical? What would you have wanted to do? You know, and I think maybe then it just allows them a bit more creativity and a bit more space to focus on what they need, rather than the fatigue perhaps that they get from having to get us to the point where we're ready to talk about what they need, having understood their situation.
I think exactly right, and also as well, we've got, you know, it'll be people talking to a machine. So very much when we're having normal human to human conversation, there's a lot of emotions. You can bounce off other people's feelings, and you know, tone and stuff like that in a room can be elevated and can almost govern how you look at something. Whereas when someone's interacting with an AI, that AI may have a voice and may sound like it's portraying emotion, but it's still a flat line. And I think that can also as well help to de-escalate when stakeholders are potentially looking at change that they may not like, and look at it from a, you know, kind of like a neutral perspective, and then can explore it from a neutral perspective, explore what is possible with that change, or what do they actually want and need. And I think that's another space where AI can really support.
I think so. I didn't realise we were so close to time, such as how interesting this conversation is, I must admit. But no, maybe we should draw it to a close there, gents. But it has been another interesting conversation, particularly on, you know, a number of things related to automation. I think the reassuring thing is that we've still got a job as related to BAs for the foreseeable. And I think another interesting outcome of the conversation anyway is that, you know, I think we can feel confident that there's loads of interesting things to be done that we haven't really even thought about yet, or, you know, maybe doing similar to what you've been looking at, Paul, or beyond. But maybe that's one for another day. But no, really appreciate the time, really appreciate the insights and sharing, and for sharing the questions as well, Ben. It's nice to have a few questions chucked back in as well.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us, John.
That's been brilliant. Thank you.